my creative heroes didn't take the gigs early on and then try and like work them back around to like creativity. The bands I like and the filmmakers I like, they just made the stuff they were making. There became money around it and there became credibility around it, but now it's completely on their terms. You have to keep the lights on, so I'm always like, just don't buy expensive lights.
Joel P. West is a musician and composer. He scored indie films like Short Term 12 and Band of Robbers, as well as last year's major motion picture, The Glass Castle. Just before our conversation today, he had wrapped up season 3, an episode of season 3 of Chef's Table, which I'm super excited to check out myself. That's going to be on Netflix at some point in the future. Unless you're listening to this in the future, in which case I'm wrong. The conversation today was great. It was high energy. He's super talented and gives a lot of insight into the creative process. In our chat, we talk about believing in your abilities and really gaining confidence in what you do, enjoying the process of creating, and when to say yes to projects and when to say no. This podcast is brought to you advertisement free. If you want to support the show, there are a couple things that you can do. You can leave a review on iTunes. You can share this podcast or your favorite podcast episode with a friend. You can contribute a question to the show, sending them in to hello@mattdiavella.com. That way my guests and I can get to the bottom of some of the things that you guys are dealing with. And overall, just download, subscribe, all that stuff. You guys know the deal. I don't need to tell you how to do this. But anyway, would love to keep this thing advertisement free. Would love to grow this podcast. And if you can help, that would really mean a lot to me. Okay, let's get into this podcast. This is Joel P. West. You're listening to The Ground Up Show, a podcast that inspires creatives to make meaningful content and pursue their passions. My name's Matt Diavella, and I'm a filmmaker best known for the Netflix documentary Minimalism. And I'm sitting down with creators to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact. Joel, thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the podcast. You want to start the show?
Sure.
Cool.
How do I do that?
I think it might have started already.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Half the time it just kind of, we just get running straight into it. But so it's called The Ground Up Show. You know, I talk about people's stories and how they got started with something. We've worked together before. I want to learn a little bit about that. But first, what have you been up to lately? Give me a rundown of what your work's like these days.
Yeah, so I just finished doing music for an episode of a show, Chef's Table, which I was excited to do because I'm a big fan of that show. So I turned that in on Sunday night. It's Tuesday now, so I'm kind of starting a little break. I'm going to head up to Big Sur next week to try and work on some lyrics for an album I've been writing that kind of want to sneak some time in on before I get on the next project. So, I'm finishing up a pretty busy season because this episode went over the holidays. So it was just like pretty full on for a while, and quick turnaround for a lot of music, but really excited about it, and fresh off that and just starting to figure out what I'm doing next. So.
Is that generally what your schedule looks like these days, where it's a big project and then you have some downtime and then big project and then downtime? Yeah,
it for sure is, and I kind of prefer it that way. I have a really hard time halfway working on things. If I'm on, I know it's the right project if I'm a total maniac and don't think about anything else for the entire time I'm working on it. So I'm not very good at doing two things at once. So I love working on feature films and I love working on albums because I can just live in it for 2 months usually, or sometimes even longer, and just completely do only that. And even when I'm spending my free time, I'm usually thinking about it. And then I sort of take a big break and then come back to another project later. So to me, it's a big inhale, exhale, back and forth, where I just go fully into making things for a long season, and I just completely exist in that. And then when it's done, I sort of come up for air and then figure out, kind of listen to my body and mind and figure out what what I've been neglecting and sort of what I'm interested in, and usually just like try and watch a bunch of movies, listen to a bunch of records, read, and then sort of like get ready to jump in on another project whenever it comes, and go full in again.
It's a good point that it is like a lot of times it's full time, as in it's not even just, you know, if you work 8 or 10 hours in a day, but then once you're done, it is so hard to turn that off, to be like, all right, I'm not going to think about this project anymore, because you might think of different ideas when you're on the subway or if you're riding your bike. Is that, I guess, one of the reasons why you do that is that it would be very hard to do 2 projects at the same time, because those kind of ideas overlap. And specifically for you, your music is so crafted to specific films. It's not like you can just take Band of Robbers and throw that on another soundtrack, on another film. It would just sound completely off. Does that help you in your creation to be very focused?
I think it's just what I like to do, and so it's more of an indicator to me that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because when I first, like, I always try and think of, I think most creatives are trying to tap into something from our youth, or kind of like there's like an organic process of being artistic and creative when you're younger, because you're not thinking about anything but just like what you want to do. Like there's not these other pressures. And so I think for me, getting back to that, like that pure creativity it's always a good sign if I'm doing something else and in the back of my mind I'm kind of like excited to get out of the social event or the movie or whatever I'm doing to like go work. Not because I'm like, I'm behind, I need to get this done. And like, if it's that's not great. But if it's more like I'm excited, like I really want to get back to the work because I'm excited, because I have ideas. I love that feeling, and I love having a project in the back of my mind. So when I'm out taking a walk, or I don't know, just watching things or listening to things, that I have kind of like a butterfly net that's like looking for little inspiration or ideas or different ways of seeing things. And so, yeah, that's kind of just, to me, it's like, it's where good work comes from, is when I just care so much that it's sort of taking over me. And I also, I don't take being able to do this for work lightly. And I don't know how long it's going to last. So to me, I'm always, I think there's a certain gratefulness that sort of drives good work too, of like realizing that you're getting to work on something that you care about and something that, you know, feeds you creatively. I don't know, whenever I get in a mode where I'm like kind of starting to complain about how much work it is, it's like a good sign to like go take a 5-minute walk and sort of zoom out and realize that, I don't know, it's like a total gift to be able to do this kind of thing. So I just like going full on, but that's just me. So
yeah, I always half expect that everything's just going to fall apart at any moment. I'm like, things are going too well. And then when I look back, like even making a feature-length documentary at one point was like this grandiose dream where I'm like, oh, like if I could do that. And even at that time, I'm like, things are great. I've got great clients that I work with. I'm doing work that I'm fulfilled with. But at any given time, it could fall apart. And I think that if you're okay with that, if you're like, man, I am so grateful that I just have this opportunity to do it right now, it just takes that stress off. Who was it? It was somebody was talking about Eddie Murphy. Like they had a conversation with Eddie Murphy, and it's like, man, why don't you do comedy anymore? And he's like, well, I got to the top. I was like, and it's so hard to stay there. He's like, I was at the top. Everything was great. He was doing the biggest movies of all time. He was doing these I don't know if you're like familiar with his old comedy specials, but he wore this like leather suit, and it was like a leather jacket, leather pants, but he was like a superstar. And then he just felt like he couldn't maintain it. And it's like, well, you don't have to maintain it. You don't have to be at the top. You don't always have to be like the number one booked comedian of all time. It's about actually enjoying the work you do. And if, you know, maybe he didn't like it, but if you actually enjoy that work, if you enjoy doing stand-up, if it's 200 people, great. If it's, you know, 1 million people, cool. But it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like a good lesson in like just trying to like, I don't know, truly be honest with yourself and think about what you actually want. Because it is, on the outside, it probably seems crazy to people for somebody like that to sort of like, I don't know, dip out and not keep producing the work that everybody like loves. Because I think it's like easy to go like, well, if I was in that position, I would like want to like squeeze that out as hard as I could. And it's like a good reminder that, I don't know, it's you have to judge success based on your own like interpretation and needs and desires of what you want. And if that's not, I don't know, I think like it's the scariest thing being successful in what you do to an outside perspective, but not actually caring about it that much yourself. It's like a weird place to be, you know, for instance, if you just become kind of typecast and getting really good work in an avenue of the creative thing you do, like that you don't like that much. I feel like that happens for a lot of people. Like you just have this awesomely steady flow of work that you're not that excited about. So it's like tricky because you're involved in what you like to do, but it's not like exactly it. And you feel kind of like lame complaining about it. I don't know.
Everybody's like, why would you complain about that? You've got it made. You've got all this money. You've got like these amazing projects you work on. That's probably harder to restart and to completely change up what you're doing when you have this quote unquote success than it is to start from the very beginning. Because when you're starting from the very beginning, nobody's listening, nobody's watching. It doesn't really matter. You can't fail. But then when you already have this platform, that's why I like The Rock is like one of my biggest inspirations, because he's one of those guys that like continually reinvented himself over the years. Like football player, that didn't work out. He turned into professional wrestling. Like that's like a crazy profession to get into. He achieved success in that, and then switching over to become an actor. And like I'm sure so many professional wrestlers have tried to do that. Most of them weren't able to make that transition, but you have to be able to take that risk. Like everybody's gonna be like, "You're crazy. There's no way." The Rock's in a movie. The Scorpion King. No, that's not gonna work.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like just I wonder if he just was able to take himself serious enough that everybody else did too. Because I don't know, when you see that professional wrestling stuff, like it's pretty crazy. Like it's pretty ridiculous. Like it's kind of hard to believe that it exists and has like the following that it does, because it's so campy. So you're like, to think of him as like a real comedic actor or like something. I don't take that serious. Like on its face, I don't take it seriously. So I kind of wonder if he just took himself seriously enough to be like, I truly want to do this, and everybody ended up being like, oh, okay, yeah, that's actually like working.
Yeah, it was just like all sheer belief. Like he believed in himself so much that he was able to make it happen. And he's a guy that started from nothing. He had like $7 to his name, and like just to be able to keep that going. But it's crazy to think about his path and like, how did he go? Like to just make it as an actor is one thing, but then he became like the biggest Hollywood star on the planet. Like that,
crazy.
It's weird.
Never met him, but
I don't know if you can see behind you. I've got a photo of The Rock.
That's a good photo.
Yeah, I've got this recurring thing on the show where I'm trying to get The Rock on my podcast. He hasn't returned my phone calls yet, but I'm working.
I believe in you.
Yeah, so I always try to bring him up at least one time in every show. So you grew up in Oregon?
Yeah.
Is that right? What was that like?
It was awesome. I realized more and more how awesome it was. My dad worked at a summer camp, which I also realized more and more that he just had it pretty dialed, because he liked being in the woods. He was like a youth pastor. He liked working with kids. So he started working at this summer camp, which meant that we lived there. And during the summer, it was really busy. It would fill up with kids, and like a summer staff would come out, mostly like college kids. And then in the winter, or I guess the 3 other seasons, it was just rentals on the weekend. It was just kind of slow. It was a couple, just us and 2 other families lived up there. So he had a pretty sweet gig, because he just walked to a little office. It was like a couple 100 yards away, and was just around. And we were just kind of up there doing our thing.
That's amazing. So you just lived in the woods.
Yeah.
And you lived on a summer camp like all year round.
Yeah, we lived at the camp all year round.
Wow.
So, you know, to me that was normal to me growing up, but now I realize that it was pretty special. It's really beautiful. It's if you've ever been to the forest up there in Washington, Oregon, it's kind of, I mean, it all kind of looks the same, but it's like rainforest. It's just super dense. Ferns and like big trees. It's like everybody thinks about Return of the Jedi or something, you know, like
right.
Just really lush forest like that. So I got to grow up in that, and it was great. It was also really creatively challenging. I was where I went to high school is a really pretty low income, rural, kind of like farm town. And so I think partly because my parents were a little bit outsiders, like they moved there to be at the camp, but probably had like a little more education and just kind of like world knowledge than the average person who's there, who mostly was born and grew up there. It was always like I think I always kind of felt like an outsider, and I didn't have a big truck covered in mud, and I didn't have guns, and I didn't like care about most things like baseball or things that people were into. I was like, I think I kind of loved being an outsider, but I was like into skateboarding, I was into music, and I kind of like was a lone wolf, and so I was a little bit ready to get out of there too. So now I love it, and I love going back, but it was like a beautiful place that I also had to kind of like run from, because same small town story most people have, just wanting to be involved in creative things, and finding nobody to sort of like lead me there in that world, and having a hard time picturing like what I would do if I stayed there. So
right, it's funny how we find the value in what that is, like the small hometown and the quiet. We were just talking before the podcast about how, living in LA or especially New York, it can be a little bit draining on your psyche, and you appreciate more and more those kind of moments of solitude where you can be out in the woods and be surrounded by, nothing but nature.
Yeah, it's really special. And I think like we were talking about seasons too, and I think it's a really good practice, I think, being in, I mean, to me it's like a funny concept, just that that we use the word nature to like, that nature is something that happens like outside of normal life, because I mean it is here, but it's like a weird concept to me that living in a city, it is like a separate experience, and you like do one or the other. But I do think that experiences in open spaces and in nature, and especially that are seasonal, I think are really special. And I think it's a good practice to kind of give into that, because I think in Southern California is like the inventor of like being entitled with getting to do whatever you want with your day, and being never ever being inconvenienced by like weather or by like, I don't know, like it's sort of just like a fictional place with like, we have grass and trees that we just put here, and because we have sunshine. And so I think it's like there's something about the life up there that there's, for one, a lot of times there's just a lot of days you can't do stuff you want to do. It's just like raining buckets, or it's snowing, or it's icy, you can't drive. And then also there's like moments that are really special, like wildflowers come out, or the leaves change, or the waterfalls get big like in the spring, and there's like things that you kind of like you get excited for, or blackberries like are in bloom, you can go pick them anywhere in like the ditches on the side of the road. So there's something really good, I think, about that practice that is, I think if I got too far away from it living here, I would just start probably believing all the other dumb myths that we sort of surround ourselves with living in, I don't know, in like a city.
You just get caught up in, and a lot of times it's like unspoken patterns, like the busyness and the rushing around everywhere, to be completely disconnected from the calm. I think can certainly have an effect on you, and it probably has an effect on your work as well.
Yeah, I think you start taking yourself too seriously, and you start thinking that like career things and, I don't know, just owning objects like actually matters, or you like start actually believing that is going to do anything for like your experience as a human being, which it's not.
Yeah, I remember like just growing up having the most amazing experiences just looking up at the stars. Like I'd get home late at night in high school, and then I'd park the car, I'd sit on my hood and just like look up at the stars for like 30 minutes and just be memorized. And it was like the most reassuring thing in the world, and it was like a form of meditation where if I was stressed out about class, or I was stressed out about my job or work, just to do that would be like, dude, what am I worried about? And it's hard in a city, or when you're surrounded by light pollution, to be able to even see the stars. But every once in a while, I'll have that experience if I'm, back home, or if I'm, traveling to Joshua Tree or somewhere else, where you can just kind of sit back and realize like, oh, okay, my problems are so small.
For sure. Yeah, I think if we could see, anybody who hasn't ever, I think there are a lot of people who have never seen the night sky like really far out of a city, like with no moon, where it's just like white, where it's like almost like milk, like it's more white than black almost, where it's just so crazy how many stars you can see. I think if you could see that every night, I think that the world would be like a little bit different place as far as like people's interactions and the way that they see themselves. Because you're right, like it's the whether you like, no matter like how involved you are in something else or stressed or whatever you're into, like when you see that, when you like get out of the car and like look up and see it, like I feel like it's 50% fascination and awe and just like loving it, and 50% just total existential panic, like looking out there, you know. But when you see it, it stops you in your tracks, because you're like, oh, we're floating out here.
It's just awe. Like, it's just like it's kind of a definitely like a speechless moment where it's kind of hard to put it into words. That's the one thing that I'm grateful for in terms of filmmaking, is that it's gotten me to wake up early to capture sunrises. When, like, I remember the first time I shot a sunrise, it was for this little doc series that I had started called Limbo, and it was about people's experience post college graduation. Because I had found myself in a state of limbo where I had $100,000 in student loan debt, and I was like, well, where do I go now? I have this degree, but I don't have a job. I'm not making any money. And I was seeing a lot of my friends in the same place, especially just following the 2008 financial crisis. So there weren't many jobs at the time. And I had linked up with my friend who was trying to be a professional cage fighter right after. And he like had graduated with a degree in broadcast telecommunications. So I followed him around for a couple of days as he was prepping for his first fight. And it was like up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I woke up early to get the sunrise. It's always a little bit painful when you first wake up. You're like, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do this. This is like, I should just go back to bed. It's going to be a long day. And then I hike up to the top of this lookout point in Scranton, and I filmed the sunrise. And like looking back, it probably wasn't the most spectacular sunrise I've ever seen, but I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it. Just
being up for it. And then all day you feel like you have this secret that nobody else knows, that you sort of got, you like kind of have a whole different perspective on the day than, and you, it's like your own little secret you have with the universe that you got to do that or something.
Yeah, you're like you guys didn't see this. Like I feel like I have a better picture of the day and the world.
Yeah, and you like check in with yourself, and you sort of like have this, I don't know, there's something that's like hard to explain about just getting up early and having that. Like I guess to me, I think about like when you meet up for coffee and you've been up forever and you've like done all this stuff and seen these beautiful things, and you can tell that other people are like just sort of surfacing, and you're like, whoa, I just got away with something amazing. Like I already did so much today.
Are you an early riser?
Yeah, I'm like a pretty light sleeper, and I like I work really well in the mornings, so I try and keep that discipline. I'm actually like late in the last few months, for the first time in a long time, like a decade, I started like regularly staying up till like 2 or 3 working creatively. But it was a little bit of an experiment. But I like my mornings. I think also living in a city, it's just you have the place to yourself for a little bit. Because you can stay up late, but it's like LA's busy at night. Like it's busy, there's traffic, like it's still hectic. It's cool, like LA, especially in the summer at night, it's kind of great, but mornings are dead. And on the I feel like where I live in such a hipster neighborhood that's like a lot of freelance creative people and people working in film, nobody's up.
Dude, it's amazing.
Nobody.
Very early on, my girlfriend Natalie, she was in Australia getting her visa situated, and she was coming back, so I picked her up. It was like 5 a.m. I wake up to go pick her up at the airport. And like having experienced a little bit of LA traffic before, and I was like, so I prepared like an hour to get there. It took me 15 minutes to get to the airport. No cars. This was so when you leave at like 5 a.m. on a Saturday, nobody's awake.
Yeah.
Nobody's up. So it was like if I feel like that alone gives me some comfort and just being able to freely move about. Like if you're one that's always frustrated with traffic, wake up a little bit early.
Yeah.
You could go to the beach if you want. It could take you 15 minutes to get there. It's I think it's definitely one of those things that you have to I don't know. Like I know some people are stay up late at night. That's when they do their best work. But for me, to be able to consciously make that shift to wake up between 5:30 and 6:30 every day has just helped me so much. Like you said, it's like you get more work done by 11, or you experience more by 11 than you normally would in an entire day.
Yeah. There's something kind of, I don't know. It's hard to put my finger on it, but I feel like it gives me a clarity and like an openness to the day, because I've gotten, because I feel like I'm ahead of it. Mm-hmm. I feel like when I wake up at like 9 or something, I'm like, oh no, like I'm already like, I need to like start the things that I am planning on doing. And it feels like I'm not in control of my day or something. Like I just have to like jump in and get it. I can't like take a break and just go sit in my hammock and think about something for 10 minutes. Cause I'm like, I need to get this going. I owe people some things that I said I'd get them today or whatever. And so,
it just starts to stress you out. And when you wake up a little bit early, I think it gives you the ability to step back and kind of control. You're right. It's a feeling freedom. Of control.
Yeah. And you can, and I think in doing that, then you also kind of get a perspective of just like realizing, one, that you can usually get stuff done a lot faster than you think if you like are focused and are excited to just get it done so you can get to something else, instead of just like piddling online, like looking at God knows what, just trying to get a dumb email off that really is it's like a minute of work, but it's like 20 minutes of just like whatever. I think like I'm so much less likely to kind of like spin out doing dumb things with my time if I like wake up early and kind of like get that time to sort of, I don't know, almost like set intentions for myself for the day and get excited about things or I don't know, take care of just something I'm stressed about.
Yeah, I think to wake up early, you actually have to have a plan of what you're going to do. Because I've definitely done it before where I'm like, I'm going to wake up early tomorrow. And then my alarm goes off and I'm like, but I didn't have a plan for what I was going to do. So I would just snooze it and I'd be like, whatever. Like I know I got work to do, but I can get it done later. But then when I say, all right, I'm going to wake up and then, for the first half hour, I'm going to do this. Or I'm going to prep a podcast. I'm going to, shoot off some emails. If I have at least a plan of what I want to do with the first 2 to 3 hours, and like you said, like when I'm excited about a project, when I'm like, oh, I can't wait to edit that video. I can't wait to, take the next step on that project. That I think is what gets you out of bed early.
Yeah, for sure.
You weren't exposed to much media growing up in that summer camp in Oregon. Did you have a TV?
Well, we had one. We didn't get TV channels.
What'd you do? Oh, so was it like
we just had
movies?
Like VHS? Yeah. I mean, we could kind of get PBS would come in some. There was like it depended on the weather and it depended on like how many people were in the room because there's like weird. I don't know if you ever had this with the TV because we had like an antenna, like not like on the roof or anything. Just the TV itself had like a big antenna, and you could like kind of almost like you're playing a theremin or something if you know what those are.
Yeah.
You could like move your hands and then you get like a better signal. But it was like
everybody had to be in like a position. It was kind like BOA.
Yeah, it was like if somebody like left, you're like, hey, you like come stand there.
Right,
again,
don't move.
So we had very limited.
That's all for PBS too.
Yeah, that was like just trying to get like Sesame Street or something. But so we had like we would like have VHS tapes and stuff. But the thing is that I think my parents were like probably pretty excited to have that much control over. At least my dad was like he's very sheltery, like conservative, like Christian guy that just was like. We couldn't watch I could not watch anything. Like I couldn't watch PG movies until like high school pretty much. Like
wow.
It was like we just didn't watch them. We just went outside, which now I'm grateful for. But it's a little funny because it may be a contributor to my creative voice just because I have no idea what other people are doing or I'm just catching up, like I have like I don't have the language because I just didn't have the exposure, but at the same time, I'm like actively always trying to catch up on things. Like I'm like I have a list of movies. For instance, I just watched The Godfather like last week for the first time. Like I watched.
It's those movies where everybody's like, you have to watch this.
Yeah. Forrest Gump. I just watched that last year. Like things like that. I just never watched.
I feel the same way actually about music. I don't know if that was the same for you, but I was like. didn't first listen to the Beatles until college, or
Me
the
neither.
Rolling Stones
Yeah.
until like a year and a half ago when I read the dude's memoir. So it's like there's so many creations that are out there. There's so much amazing art between film and TV and music that, I mean, it can be overwhelming first, but at the same time, like if you can find kind of those well curated pieces from the past, I feel like you can learn a lot from them.
For sure. And I mean, I used to hate Spotify a little bit as an artist because it's a little scary. It's very much like changing what it means to put music out and the way people consume music. And in a lot of ways, it kind of goes away from things I like about music. But just just the wealth of just being able to like get lost in there and just catch up and discover. It's kind of like, if it's like a Friday, I'll just see what new albums are coming out. And if there's nothing, I usually get excited to like listen to new music over the weekend because people put records out on Fridays now. And it's like, I'll look, and if nobody's releasing something I'm interested in, then I just immediately kind of click into this mode of like, what could I like catch up on? Like things like actually it was last year, I think I just realized I didn't even really know what the Grateful Dead sounded like. So I'm like, I'm just going to spend some time like figuring that out. And not necessarily like my favorite, I'm not that into them, but I was like, it was cool to like get into them for like a little while just to like check it out,
And I think if enough people are talking about something, or if it's attracted enough of an audience, you be like, all right, there's obviously something there.
Yeah.
This is resonating with people. What is it about this music that is connecting?
Yeah, especially timeless stuff, because it's like there's, I don't know, the chances of being creatively like excited about a Bowie record that I just never listened to versus like just some random record that somebody put out yesterday, like probably gonna be more to find on that Bowie record that like tons of people over decades have been like, that's a crazy record, you should listen to that.
Right.
So I'm always like trying to find that kind of stuff that I just missed the boat on, or I don't know, it's just sitting out there just waiting waiting for somebody to find it, sort of.
It is one of those challenging things that I've found myself where when you are a creator, when you're constantly making stuff, and say if you're in that mode of like you're working on chef's table and you're like it's consuming so much of your life, to find time to still consume or experiment or learn, or in a lot of ways it needs to be scheduled, because like how do you find the time to actually experiment and find new music when you're always working?
I walk a lot. Like it's kind of like it's always been like a part of my creative routine and just part of my like my day. And then we just adopted this dog like a year ago, and so that's just adds to that, or it just like it sort of like formalized the practice, because she's always wanting to go on a walk. So I spend a lot of time on Spotify prepping playlists. Like if I'm gonna work on, like before I make any music, usually for something, well, not necessarily before, but like when I first get hired for a project, I will read the script or like see whatever there is to see, and then especially if I have a conversation with the director like about where they're trying to go creatively, then I usually just start loading up massive playlists of just anything that I think might be like interesting, and always trying to my goal is always to try and go like listen to music that's not like the music I'm about to make, because if I listen to something that's like that sounds similar to what I'm trying to do, then I'm just going to copy it. So I try and find something that interests me and that's like exciting or kind of new to me, that is like going to be hard to mimic like directly. So I don't know, like if I'm trying to do some like folky guitar writing, then I'm like trying to like listen to, I don't know, like an old film score or like some big classical thing, because there might be some interesting chord change or some kind of like rhythm or something that I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like I wonder if I could adapt something like that, like stretch it really far into this like other world of music I'm trying to work in, and then see if it becomes something new. So I just spend a lot of time, I don't know, like I'll load look for music and I'll just stack it up and then listen to it usually in the mornings. I go on walks and just listen, like save stuff, and those playlists kind of start getting like consolidated down into like a more of like a greatest hits of just things that are exciting to me or have kind of like give me some kind of a spark. Usually, I guess if nothing else, just give me like make me think about something in a way that's not the natural way I would think about it, and go like, oh, you could totally do this whole other, there's a total other creative decision that could be made here. So I do that a lot. And then I also am pretty intentional about like, I always have lists going of what I want to watch, just because I feel like it's, I feel like the one weird thing with like digital platforms is that they're totally just winning on just getting us to watch whatever they want us to watch, which luckily like a lot of that content's great. Like the stuff that Netflix is trying to get you to watch is actually pretty great. So it's like, I don't know, that's something to be thankful for. But for me, I'm like, I like to be in control of what I'm watching and like have an idea list so when I'm lazy and I just want to watch something, I like have something easy to pull up and go like, oh yeah, I wanted to watch that. Or because I'm usually trying to watch something that's related to what I'm doing. So, I watched a few other documentaries while I was working on Chef's Table, just to like, I don't know, keep expanding my mind of like what's possible and what other people do, and try and shake up my own creative tendencies.
And a documentary is a little bit unique in that oftentimes there's a voiceover or a talking head over the music, and sometimes the music, you don't want it to compete with.
It's a totally different approach than a feature, because the features I like to work on, I'm never really scoring scenes. Like I usually score dramas, and it's like the music is like for like passing time or for breaking things up. It's not usually like underneath the scene. It's like in between things, and the music comes up loud and it's like has its moment to break things up, and then it goes back to like quiet scenes. So the music should be special, and it kind of like it's dense, like it, it's like it's there to shake things up, and it's there to kind of like give you emotional relief or something. So doc, it's totally different, because it's just like it's just always there in the background, and it's like it needs to like kind of be able to go invisible, but also stay interesting and not get repetitive. It's a totally different thing. This Chef's Table is kind of different because the music is so like they space out the interviews so much that the music has a moment that the music can be kind of more busy. But yeah, I mean, when I worked on the music for your doc, it was like, I remember being like, man, this is just a lot. There's just a lot of music that needs to like be interesting enough, but not too dense to where it's like competing or grabbing your attention. It's like weird. It's like trying to create like a feeling that just stays there, and then is a feeling that you can then switch to like mark, even just to break up, like let the audience know that we're switching into a different chapter, or this is like, I don't know, to break up an interview or something. Like you can have like the music start, stop, switch.
Right.
It's like a totally different practice. I'm like, I'm not as good at it. I'm like still learning that.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, with Design Disruptors, it's like we had 70 interviews. Like this is a talking head documentary. We didn't end up including that many. It might have ended up being like 25 or so, but that can come across very dry. And so the music is one of the most important things that just kind of pulls you in. It gets you to think a little bit. It helps to complement the motion graphic scenes that you have. The one thing that was interesting was the fact that there's themes that you create, right? And you do this with pretty much every score I think you make. Where, like you'll have these kind of, I think what you said was like, hey, let's just find like that one track that feels like the film. Like, and actually maybe you can walk me through that process, because I really liked your process where sometimes people do scratch, where they just kind of create kind of cheap recordings or low quality recordings, but you were like from the very beginning recording high quality and sending in samples that would end up being used in that final film. So yeah, talk me through that process and then kind of creating those themes.
Once I get into a film, I'm going to have to score specific scenes and make music that just functionally serves whatever it is, whether it be the storytelling of like a narrative and creating the world, or whether it just be moving things along and keeping energy and keeping like a tone for a documentary. that stuff to me comes later. The first process is just figuring out what the music is and trying to find something special. And I like to do that I like to do that just based on just either some footage I've seen or the script, if it's a narrative feature, and just trying to like find something that just generally feels like the project. It's also a way, music is extremely hard to discuss between two people before it exists, because you may be talking about different things. And so it's also a way to just kind of close the gap and make sure that the director and I are talking about the same thing. So a lot of times kind of like we'll have early conversations and we'll both get really excited, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. But then I need to go make some music and report back with it and see if that's what see if we were talking about the same thing. And then be able to use comparative language of more this or less this, or, I like this aspect, I don't like this aspect. So I usually try and make music that's make a few pieces of music just early on, whether I properly record them or just do them with like scratch instruments, just to kind of get a feel and close in the conversation and figure out what our like smaller musical world should be. And then I like to kind of go do a second round of that sometimes is specific to scenes, or sometimes is just trying to think of like a bunch of different tones that may be in the cut, and essentially just creating temp music for the editor to use, because the editor is going to need to throw some music in. It's so hard to edit without music, so you're gonna have to put something in there. And so essentially like the second phase, after I've made a few things that kind of whittled down with the director, like a couple pieces of music that feel like they're the right world and right vibe for the film, then it's like, then I kind of move on and expand on that and try and make a bunch of temp music essentially that the editor can use instead of using stuff from other films. So we're actually at least working with and developing our own stuff instead of like building the cut around music that's going to change. So it's like, letting it kind of grow together.
Yeah, and there's that thing called temp love, where if you use somebody else's music in it, generally you kind of become attached to that music that you originally used, whether it's like
you just get used to it. Yeah, it's hard to see it when you watch a piece of video with one piece of music in it 100 times. It's really hard to see it another way. I don't know. It's kind of like seeing the Fox Searchlight logo come up or something, and they just change the song, and it's just
imagine
like
that.
And you'd be like, wait, that's not supposed to be. It's supposed to like go, dun, 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 like it. You get used to it, even if it's not right. You just get used to it. So I always think it's helpful for everybody just to kind of like feed some temp music, and it's like that thing you're talking about of starting with music that just feels right. That's not even for a scene. Like this movie I worked on last year called The Glass Castle. There's a piece of music that I made for that was kind of like one of the first things I made, and the director was like, this feels like the movie. This feels like what I want this movie to feel like. And I was like, I kind of like loved the piece, and it was like, okay, cool. This is kind of like our guide. And that piece of music is not in the film, but I pulled ideas from it throughout the whole time. I kind of picked apart why that music was working and like why it felt special to us. And like, ultimately couldn't find a place to put that specific piece of music in. So that is just, it still just exists. It's just stray, but it was like a toolbox for the rest of the creative process. So that there's like, when I'm going to solve a scene of like, oh, this needs to be more like, we need to do something like tense, or this needs to like, I don't know, something functional. I'm like, okay, well, what tools do I have from that we already kind of found? So that's like the process I like to work on.
I feel like a lot of your soundtracks can be very simple in terms of the build. Sometimes one track might just be strings, or it may at least be strings for 45 seconds, and it's kind of building that tension. How do you go about, because I know a simple song or a simple film or a simple edit never starts out simple, right, and it's never obvious. How do you go about getting to that point?
I always think it's way easier to edit down from wealth than to try and like, I don't know, scratch together like simple things to get bigger. And I also think like it's really hard to come up with an original simple idea out of thin air. I don't trust it usually. Like if I have like a little melody in my head, and I'm like, oh, it's like a cool little melody. This would like work. And it just came out of nowhere. It scares me because I'm like, where did I come up with that? Or is it like actually just something I heard somewhere? Because it's happened to me like early on in doing this. Like I had some moments, either songwriting or score writing, where I like just was walking around and just had like an idea just like click in, like, oh, this little melody is like a piano, and go home and like write it and super like get into it and start working on it. And then like a week later just click and be like, that is an actual Andrew Bird song that I just recreated on my computer without realizing that it was swirling in my head. And so somehow I decided that I wrote it. So that scares me.
That's very scary.
You know, the turnaround is fast doing score music. So I don't trust those random stray ideas because they may just be versions of something else I've been listening to, and I may not have enough time to realize that. And I don't want to be the only one that doesn't notice that it's exactly a copy of something, you know, like that stuff scares me. And music's mysterious in that way. It's kind of hard to keep track of like originality in that sense. So I like to know where my influence is coming from. I like to know where the ideas are coming from. And I like to start by making things that are a little overboard. So my approach usually is to try and score every single scene in a film, that every place that it seems like you'd ever think to have music. Let's try music there. I'm going to write one or two ideas for it, and then I'm going to make everything kind of like as full as I can think to do it, and then we'll start taking away. And when you have something that you think is interesting and like is like a kind of more of a full-on composition and is kind of more fleshed out and probably a little more heavy-handed, like, and direct, you start to like take things away based on what it feels like it needs. It usually gets more and more original, because a lot of times it's like I started with like a piano, like writing some chords, and then I kind of played something on top of that, and then I had some guitar on that, and then we had some strings, and I'm like kind of building something up. And then the last idea I have, because maybe something feels like, oh, this feels like it needs to be more beautiful or something, and so then maybe there's like some flutes go on top of it. Then a month later, we are whittling down, we're taking things away. We end up taking away that piano that I started with. We end up taking away the guitar. And now the flutes are like the thing, and I'm building around the flutes. And so it's like, if something goes through a process like that, then I kind of can trust that it is ours and it's unique to the film. And I also can trust that it's going to serve the project creatively, because we've given it enough time to see what's working and to like try it with and without different things, and kind of whittle down like what is the essential thing that's happening that's like working, and let's just get rid of everything else, and then it's going to be more interesting and it's going to be stronger. And I also love working on films that don't need a lot of music, because I don't know, I like just films that feel real. So those usually don't need tons of music, and it's usually like more is like less is more. So
I feel like that idea of like, so say you start out with the piano and you go through this whole progression of adding, and like say the last thing you add is the flute, and then eventually it comes down to it where almost the flute carries this whole song. I think that goes against our intuition. Our intuition is the piano made the song, so the piano has to stay. The piano has to stay. Was that always obvious to you? And how do you, I think I forget who said it, but it's like kill your darlings, like the things that you love about something originally, or what you might see as the best part of it, you might eventually have to remove it because it doesn't fulfill the story or the role.
It probably used to be, but I get excited about it now, and it's not hard for me to leave that stuff behind. Sometimes it is if I just really love it's more, I usually get more stuck on like if I just write a piece of music and I'm like, I love this, and then the scene keeps changing and it's making less and less sense in that scene, but I'm like, damn, I like that. I like the way that music played for that scene before, so I'm like, we'll hold on to it maybe a little bit just because I like the piece and I don't want to see it get tampered with. But I usually get excited for things to change because I usually know where that initial idea came from, because like I said, I like to track it. I like to know that I like to have inspiration that's left field. Like for instance, when I was getting into the Grateful Dead, there's like this chord change in this like really like bluesy kind of like rockin' tune that I heard that I was like, I liked the way it made me feel, and I wrote that like I use that chord change for this like really pretty slow orchestral piece for the Glass Castle, and I don't really like worry about like ripping off the idea of going from this chord to this chord, because I'm using it in such a different way. I like having that anchor that I know that that's where that idea came from, so I know I didn't just steal it from some other orchestral music that sounds really, that's like in the same wheelhouse. And then I like the idea because I do usually track those like initial, like what I like to do is I'll like listen to a lot of music. I'll make some demos. I'll start scratching down an idea, and as soon as that idea is generally there, I shut that session, start something new. I'll make 10 or 15 ideas, and then I'll open those back up the next day. Sometimes I remember where I got that idea, sometimes I don't, but I'll like listen back to what I made and then see if there's anything interesting there, or see if maybe start adding to it. And like I'll kind of just move really quickly as a way of trying to like leave behind whatever it was that initially gave me that idea, because I like growing beyond it, and I like, it's exciting to sometimes the very last like pass that I do on a piece of music is the thing that makes it like special, or is like it'll be when I add some little like decoration that is the thing people hear that's like, oh, that's a cool little thing. So I kind of like doing that, and I think it's also like a good process. I think filmmakers, especially ones that are a little filmmakers always tell me like I'm not a musician, so I don't know what's going on, but that's not really usually the problem. It's usually more, I feel like some filmmakers are just a little scared of music because it just feels like so like open-ended. And so there'll be a piece that they'll like, and they'll be like, oh, I really like this. I like this about it. And sometimes you get a little stuck on them more thinking like, I think I like the piano in this. And it's me trying to break like, no, I think you like just the overall energy of this. I don't know that it needs to be piano and Sufjan Stevens' voice to get the feeling that you need. And so helping workshop that and being like, let's figure out what's working about that and try and do our own thing. Because I don't know, yeah, the Kill Your Darlings thing is like, it can be tough if you are excited about something, but for me, usually it just is the way towards something that is going to be more interesting. And I feel like the bolder I am with that, I'm like learning that usually when I'm looking back at my work, wherever I was the most bold in doing that is like, has led to the music that I'm the most excited about later when I'm looking back and be like, that's a cool piece of music that we ended up with there. And it's usually because we were like, let's just cut off all the stuff that seems safe and like go with it. So I get excited about that process because it's like, it's what leads me to things that I feel like are exciting or new.
Yeah, I think how I approach it too is, we're talking about work that's digital. That's not like you're literally not killing it and then you'll never see it again. You do, all right, let's do a V2 of that. What would it sound like if we did this? Or what would it look like if I recut the scene to feel like this? And then usually I never go back to that V1. Usually it's just, I'm like, okay, and then I build upon that or I take something away, but it's slowly evolving over time. And knowing that usually your intuition, your gut to take it forward or to change something is going to pay off in the end.
Yeah, and I think like I'm always I'm a big advocate for people working. I think probably any creative contributor to a film, to like the film world. I'm a big advocate for like making sure you're still doing a lot of your own work too, and just doing a lot of work in general, because it's not a great place to try and like get your entire creative vision as a human being out. Like it's really a specific, I'm like trying to help tell a story and it's really specific. And as soon as I need to like flex my creative muscles and like have it be my opus, it's going to start taking away from the story. Like this, nobody's coming to watch the movie because they like want to listen to the score. They want to go through like a story. So to me, it's always, I think I also don't really have that much of a problem like killing my babies in that sense, because like I stay really active on writing my own music, and I'm always taking on new projects that like when I'm working on a piece of music and I love it and it gets cut, I just know that I'm just going to use it for something else. Or I'm going to, if it's not going to work for another film project, then I'm going to adapt it into a song or into like a piece of music I can record on my own. And so like every now and then, sometimes like when I love a piece of music and it starts getting kind of stretched away from what I like about it, and then it gets cut completely, sometimes I'm relieved because I'm like, okay, cool, now I can do that. I can
use that somewhere.
Yeah, I can like preserve what I like about that and do something else with it later. Because sometimes if something I really love gets stretched away, like the thing I like about it kind of gets stripped out, and it still gets used, so it kind of feels like that's done, but that's gonna be the final piece. Sometimes I get a little bummed on that, so I'd rather just get cut and I can just like use that later.
Right, you can't take something that's like, hey, that sounds exactly like the theme to that one movie, but a little bit different. Speaking of themes, so we talked a little bit about themes, and that was one of the things with Design Disruptors and pretty much all the films you do. I was watching some behind the scenes of The Glass Castle, where you kind of have these sounds that come up throughout. So a lot of times, I'm sure most of the time, you're not just creating different sounds for every single scene. There's almost these emotional cues where you can pull back in that same music, and then it kind of builds upon those feelings that you had previously, and it kind of connects the dots in a lot of ways. Talk about how you go about that process of actually creating themes and creating a cohesive sound for a film.
Well, I think it's really, for me, it really rests in that process that you were talking about, that of like starting by just making some music that's not like, okay, this is for this scene, this is for this like opening titles, like it's just music for the movie. And so it's like, it's about establishing those rules early on and kind of figuring out what coming up with a few like flagship pieces of music that feel like they are like the right thing. And for, like for The Glass Castle, I had one that didn't even like end up in the movie, but it was a big informer of like the tone and kind of instrumentation of things. And so, cause to me, there's like, once I am like involved, like specifically involved in like the edit and the storytelling aspect of a film, the music, it switches into this mode of being purely functional. It's like, when does it start? Does it creep in? Is it ominous at first and then it switches? Or is it like, because I'm trying to make up for things that aren't either the actors aren't quite pushing hard enough on, or trying to help. Maybe there's an edit idea that happened later that's like different from the script. And so it's like, they're trying to do something new. And so music needs to like functionally help do that. And so once I'm at that phase, it's like, it's just go, go, go. And so if I don't have those rules established, I don't have some kind of like a toolbox, then it's just going to kind of be like anything goes, whatever can make it work. But if I have like a toolbox of like instruments and little themes, melodies, chord changes, things that we've kind of established just feel right for the film overall, then every time I go in and it's like, okay, we want this to feel faster. It's like, okay, well, what could I use? Like, we're not using drums in this. Maybe I could use, like, I think about what the tools are available and like, how can I plug those into the needs? So like, if it needs more energy, or it needs to be, it needs to like feel suspenseful, or it needs to feel like soft. It's like, okay, well, how can I stretch? I just try and like limit my toolbox to like whatever that initial vibe is that we found. And then if I'm kind of pulling from the same bin or the same like list of instruments and like themes each time that I'm addressing a functional problem, then things just kind of become cohesive because you're sort of like limiting your language.
Do you ever get intimidated by some of these projects? I feel like The Glass Castle and some of these films are not necessarily simple projects to walk into. There's a lot at stake for some of these projects. It appears like a lot of them you're working with big orchestras and you're working with a lot of different musicians, and then you as the composer need to direct all this and bring it all together. Mm-hmm. Do you find that intimidating, or has it, your experience kind of built upon itself and it feels natural at this point?
I think to me what feels the most intimidating is it's like, as these projects grow and as there's more and more cooks in the kitchen, as far as like there's more money being spent and there's more creative voices like above me, I'm always the most intimidated by like am I going to be able to make something that I still love, or am I going to get taken kind of like lost in the weeds of like notes and being and sort of getting bullied around by all the opinions and by like the stress. And so it's like, to me, like the being a composer is like half about just learning how to communicate, like about, and it's like I'm sort of coming in as like the moderator for the music conversation is like half of my job of like trying to like figure out what everybody's really feeling, because usually people, when they give music notes or they give kind of music, when they talk about the vision for the music, they'll use specifics that are not actually accurate for me. They like, and so it's like always trying to decode like, what do you really want? I don't know, like it'll just a lot of times be like somebody, like some kind of an exec saying, you know, saying Mumford and Sons or something, and me being like picturing actual Mumford and Sons music in what we're talking about. I'm like, that it obviously that wouldn't work, you know. So I'm like,
Right.
what do they mean by that? Like, oh, they like, I don't know, maybe they just like the drum or something.
Yeah.
Like just trying to figure that out. So that's like what's intimidating, is like walking and being like, am I gonna get to love the music I make for this, or am I gonna get like kind of lost in it? And I don't know, I think I've found that like my confidence tends to help everybody. Also my openness, I think like overconfidence, and just, it's not a confidence of believing that I'm right about everything, but just a confidence of being like, I've been asked to do this, I am the musical expert in the room, and like I'm gonna be the one that can figure out like what everybody wants and what's not working, and being open to even like trusting that somebody else is probably going to see something about the music that I don't. But yeah, just kind of coming in with like a confidence of like I can do this. It's just going to be a certain amount of work. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's an intimidating factor to it, but I think that I just get so excited about it that it's like kind of just get lost in it and don't really worry that much about it.
What makes you say yes to a project? Because at this point, you're probably saying no to more projects than you say yes to. So what is it about it that really draws you in?
To me, I think I've just realized just how intimate. If I'm going to work on a project, it's going to become an intimate part of my life for like a long period of time, and I'm going to be like super in like just tight quarters with the director, and so. I'm also like, another factor is that I'm always meeting a director at their very worst moment in their entire life, which is that especially if it's an indie, it's probably something that they've been trying to make for a very long time. It finally happened, probably on half the budget they wanted, with different actors, and you know, like whatever, like it was like a totally tough process, and then after all of that, they've just watched the first cut of the film, like right before I come on board usually. And so they just are like, I don't want anybody to see this. I don't, I'm like, you're so drained, you're so tired, and you like, it's all been for this imaginary thing. And then you watch it and you're like, that's what we made. And you know, long assembly cut usually is like pretty painful to watch. Like it's just your first version is always just gonna be like a pretty bad movie, you know? So, and usually without music. And so I've just found that I just have to really care about the project, or it's going to become a problem, because whether it be because I just don't believe the project is going to help anybody as a person, like if there's no social justice or like empowerment aspect to it that's going to like keep me in, or if there's no like creative excitement, that it's just like a cool thing, or it's like a person that I just really trust and like appreciate. Like if I don't really care, then I know it's going to be a problem. It's probably better for me to go make money doing something else, because I'm going to get too drained and frustrated if I don't trust the director, or I don't like really think that what they made is like interesting or like worth existing, or especially if I feel like it's like has an air of like entitlement or like an unawareness of privilege or something, then I'm like, ooh, like I just can picture 6 weeks later just being like in the weeds, being like, why am I like even trying to contribute to this thing? So to me, it's all about like, I would much rather I mean, at some point it'd be nice to like make real money, but I'm like, to me, it's like about, this is what I'm gonna spend my time on. I'm gonna be able to pretty much recite this movie front to back at the end. So like, if I don't care about it on some level, like, then it's gonna be a crazy thing to take on. And I also think that like, I think it's really dangerous to, I think we all as creatives trying to be in a career, you have to like know that you have to build the things and you have to make the steps and like put in your time to like build to where you want to go. But I think you can get lost, and at a certain point, like where, you know, you're looking to where you want to go, but at a certain point, whatever you're doing is where you're going, and it's what you're doing. Like that path along the way to get to this career idea that you have, like whatever you're doing now, like it's what you're spending your time doing. So like, I would much rather work on stuff that I care about and that I think I'm going to be excited about the music. And then if it happens to be a good career move, like great. But there's nothing worse than spending months on a project that you hate, that you don't believe needs to exist, that you're not excited about creatively, and then also doesn't do anything for your career. So it's like, why do you do that? So to me, it's like, all I think about is I'm going to spend just a bonkers amount of time on this. And all my friends are going to ask why I'm not hanging out. I'm going to be like, I'm working on this thing. So like, if I don't care about it, then I don't know why I'm doing it. You can make money a lot faster, you know, like on, like my hourly rate at the end of these projects is stupid, you know? So that's what I think about. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm probably not going to have much free time. I'm going to only work on this. So do I care? Because if not, I'll just like maybe find something else to do.
Yeah, the projects that you do in that moment, like today, are going to define what you work on and the projects you get and the clients that want to work with you in the future.
Yes.
When it was early on, I was doing a lot of weddings, and there just came a point where like I was doing it for, I enjoyed it, and I was like learning the craft, and it was there was some fun in it. I was pretty young, and I learned so much through that. But then it got to a point where I was like, okay, you know what? I made some good money doing this, but if I just keep doing weddings, that's what I'm going to be known for. That's all I'm going to do. I know a lot of friends that got started out making music videos because they knew a couple musicians and they were able to build upon that. But then they got stuck in that lane where they're like, I don't enjoy making music videos. It doesn't fulfill me anymore. But it's very hard to do a corporate shoot, or it's very hard to do a feature documentary when you haven't had that experience before. Yeah. So whether you're doing a passion project, or you're doing it for fun, or you're doing it for free, whatever it is, if you're working on that now, that's likely you're going to be able to use that to kind of leverage the next project that you do.
Yeah, and I think like the safest play is if you're like a truly like a creative, or you're an artist, like, then I think that the safest play is just make everything a passion project, and then like some of it pays, some of it doesn't. But like yeah, it's hard. You can't expect people to like shoot 20 weddings and then have somebody be like, oh, you're really good at that. Can you direct like this really cool like feature documentary about this like person from Syria or something? Like, that's not going to happen. I think that's true. Like it's like you got to be spending the time doing what you want to be doing and making it good. I think there's like it's like we were talking about earlier. You don't want to feel like you complaining about having work that's like pretty good, that's like pretty close to what you want to be doing. But ultimately, if you really, really want to be doing something creative, it's kind of just, I don't know, it's kind of like getting friend zoned by your own creative outlet, like where you're kind of getting to do it, but you just want to be doing the full version of what you like doing. And it's like, if the career's not going to do that for you, then maybe you just got to do it on your own and make money doing something else. Like that's how I've always felt about it. And most of my creative heroes, didn't like take the gigs early on and then try and like work them back around to like creativity. They like the bands I like and the filmmakers I like, they just made the stuff they were making, and then it grew. It became like, there became money around it and there became credibility around it, but now it's completely on their terms. You know, the directors that I like their shoots, like I feel like it's just their funders are just like, whatever you do works, just do your thing. You know, it's like they took the long route, but now they're getting to like they're just getting more resources to make exactly what they want to make. And that to me, I think is like, that's the route that I'm always trying to like go. And if that turns into me realizing that like it's not going to be something I can do during the day, it's going to have to be a weekend thing for me, then that's fine. I always also think like you have to keep the lights on, so I'm always like, just don't buy expensive lights. You know.
I love that.
Yeah.
Was there a moment when you realized that this could work, that you could be a musician and a composer, and you didn't have to have, you know, a regular day job?
Yeah, there was, because I was like always I'm like a total hack. I didn't go to music school. I don't know how to compose. I could barely read music. Like, I'm a band guy that just started writing songs because I was like trying to figure out the world, and then started like loving it's sort of like I was making folk music because I had a guitar, but I just loved Bjork, and I loved Sigur Rós, and I loved anything with an orchestra. And then there was like a day that it clicked, like, I could make music. I want to make music more like that. But I never wanted to do music for work because it was always a little too sacred for me. And then I had a friend who hired me to do music for like a featured doc. And it was totally exciting, and I was really creatively fulfilled, but just slightly less precious about it than I am with my own personal music, that I was like, didn't mind taking notes. And I liked just the school project aspect of like there being this specific need and kind of a specific like parameters to like, it's always like feeds me creatively to have these kind of limitations. So, or just like a starting place. So I was like, wow, this is really fun. And I just never thought about film scoring because, like I said, I just didn't watch movies growing up. I didn't ever think about it. So as soon as I sort of realized that was like a world, and I also kind of like quickly realized that there's not a lot of money in music in the way that I was making it, but there is, and probably will always continue to be, some money in video and film. I'm like, oh, just try to get it on that money. And like, so I was at the time I was a high school teacher. I taught high school for 3 years. I was teaching graphic design. It's like kind of random. That's what I went to school for.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was teaching that at a high school. I loved that. It was cool. And great for an artist. You know, I get off at 3 and you have a 3-day weekend, like pretty much every month. You get all the summer off. Like it's a great gig as like a person that has like a, you know, a large hobby or creative side. Like being a teacher is great, but it was also scary because it was around 2008, I think I quit in 2010. Everybody's like, I don't know, you're on your way to have like a tenured, like government funded job. Like you probably should hang on to that one, you know? But I didn't have any debt, and I just was kind of like, I don't know, I feel like I'm young enough that I could like try this and fail and whatever. Cause teaching was like, it's like that thing where I'm like, it's great and I don't want to complain about it, but it's definitely like kind of like, I'm like a kind of a private, quiet person that like doesn't like loud noises and doesn't like dirty things. And like, I don't know, like just the amount of just yelling and like hot Cheetos all over my stuff and whatever. As a high school teacher, I was like, I think this is fine, but I do think there's maybe it's not my ideal world. And so I saved up a year's worth of money, and then I just quit. And I like just started working for free for people. And then, I drained that money. Like I was like, I'll be safe if I kind of felt like I had a few avenues where I could get some work and like start to do some music for like people's like nonprofit videos and stuff, which is how I started. And then I'm like, I'll save up a year's worth of money, and I'll have that as backup, you know? And then like a year later I was out of that money because I like definitely didn't make any money doing what I was doing. But it was worth it because I was like slowly starting to get little gigs where I'd get like a few $100 here and there to make some music for these nonprofit videos or like little like promo things, you know, nothing great, nothing like exciting, but just like chance to practice and enough money that it was like, I felt like, okay, like I can stay in this. And then it slowly built into something that like, I was bartending too. Like, so, you know, I just kind of like pieced it together, and then it finally, I don't know, I pushed pretty hard to get here, you know, to be honest, but
I'm sure the first couple of years
yeah,
there were a lot of late nights and early mornings.
Yeah, like it was like I felt like I was working harder than anybody I knew, and I was like making negative money because I was like spending money to do these projects basically, and because I needed to like buy the equipment and like stuff, like I had no idea what I was doing, and I was coming up here a lot. I lived in San Diego at the time, so I felt like it was like my early 20s. I felt like everybody was having like a great time, and I was having a great time too, but I felt like I was working my ass off, and I was like, I have no idea if this is going to pay off. And I don't even, I'm like, I was also very aware, I'm like, as hard as I've worked, like I'm really bad at this. Like versus somebody who just went to school for it, or just, I don't know, has been doing it longer. Like, I don't have that much to show for. So it was kind of a grind, but, looking back on it, I just trust it. Like I don't see myself as a person who would usually quit that teaching job, which it surprises me that I did that, which makes me like realize that I probably really deep down knew that it wasn't, I saw myself being like, I saw myself like retiring from teaching as an older person and being like, oh, so I ended up just teaching. That's what I did. Like, I felt like it was that where I was like, I'm just ending up doing this, and it scared me. And so I think like I cared enough for some reason to just like quit that job with no idea if it was going to work. And then also like, I think I like loved it enough to put the time in. Like it wasn't that much it was kind of a no-brainer to put that much time in, like trying to learn, because I just really like it. So, and I think I'm in a new chapter now where I'm realizing that grind is, and it's not over. I'm still like, work is so inconsistent. It's terrifying, but, it's just like highs and lows. But, there's like, I'm now in a mode where I'm realizing like I need to slow down and really just like enjoy the work and not be like, okay, cool, I got this locked down, I can do a good job in this movie, I'm gonna see what's next. Like, like to really like remember that I love doing this. And sometimes like recording days, I just get really stressed because it's just a lot to get done, and there's really like no wiggle room to fail. Or if I forget to record something, like that's like a real thing. Yeah. Like I have everybody in the room, and I just wasn't organized enough. If I like forget to record a piece of music, then I'm like, dude, that's the end credits. Like we don't have, like,
yeah.
So,
and like you're renting out the studio space.
Yeah.
You can't come back in there.
Yeah. So like I get in that mode. And so like, it has been a grind for such a long time that now I'm like in a cool phase of realizing that it's like time to like realize that I'm here. People are trusting me with their projects, and to like, just like love it and just like remember that this is what I enjoy doing, and just like super like just embrace it and like enjoy every moment, even like the more stressful ones,
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have gone through that same path, that same trajectory where like, dude, the first couple of years, it is a struggle, and you're working your ass off. And even now I've kind of like reinvented myself and started to do the podcast and create original content. And I'm making $0 doing this. I'm still making films and doing stuff on that's like that will make me money in the future, and that will like keep the lights on. But at the same time, I'm starting over, and there's a lot of work in the beginning. Even restarting something or starting something new, you have to kind of understand that it's going to take a few years before things will actually fall into place, and before you'll actually be able to make a consistent and sustainable living from it. But you're right that you have to actually enjoy it in the moment. And every once in a while, just take a step back and realize like, this is what I'm meant to be doing. And this path is so much more exciting and is so much more fulfilling than if I did something that I didn't really love. Yeah.
And it only makes the work better. I mean, it is one scary but kind of cool aspect of like doing what we do, which is bumping around to different clients and different collaborators. Because as much as I'm building on old things and I'm getting more and more trust because of projects I've done before or whatever, when I work on a new project with new people, like they don't know how I work. And like, in a certain sense, I do have to like sort of prove myself, or, like I put it on myself to make them feel like that was a good call to hire me, and that they got somebody dependable that was like, that, elevated the thing they're trying to make. And, I think the moment you kind of stop hustling on that, like it'll just walk right away, because there's plenty of people like, it's an intimidating thing about being in this city that's also motivating, is you're like, there's definitely somebody else that can do just as good a job on this,
Yeah.
Like 100%, like probably a few doors down. So it's like, it's a good reminder to kind of just stay hungry and remember every time, I don't know, every time that I get a new project, that it's like, that's a gift, and that's like something that somebody's trusting me with, and to not really take that lightly, and to like, I think like I'm, as like an extremely privileged person for like a lot of reasons that are beyond my control. I think it's really important to think about people who have things that you kind of wish you had, that like, you're like, it's like they just got lucky and they have money, or they have these connections with people, or, like, must be nice. Like I don't know. There's always, you can look a few floors up and see people who have things that you you're like, that it would be easier for me if I had that. And I think the most annoying thing is to look a few floors up to somebody who has been given more than you for whatever reason, and to see that they're not even like stoked on it, and they're not doing anything with it. That's super frustrating. And I think it's important to realize that in the position I am, both as just a person who like ended up having a creative career that's working, and also just honestly as like a white man in America, that like there are so many people looking at me being like, must be nice. You were able to just waltz right into that. And so to take it to like have it, and know that for a lot of reasons, it's not something I like earned from like scratch versus somebody else. So like I've been given it, and then to not even enjoy it or take it like seriously, or like love it, or even worse, like complain about my situation, is pretty annoying. To like, it's really like brazen to me. To people who would be like, I wish I had those things that you have, and you don't even care, or you're not even doing like a great job on it. Like that's annoying. I don't want to be that person.
Yeah. I think all of us in some way rely on luck and circumstance, because you're never just going to make it by yourself. There's always going to be, like for me, like growing up in a middle class family with parents that love me, I lucked out to be raised in that situation. When I went to high school, and I had a great video department where I got to learn editing and shooting, and the morning announcements, like I was so lucky to get that. And then like throughout, I could look back at all these moments where I'm like just been given this gift of being in the right place at the right time, which I have no credit in taking those as like something I did. But between that, you have to put in the work, and you have to actually hustle, and you have to work your ass off. And I don't know. I feel like if for somebody who's been given everything and who's a few flights up, I still think, like, if you want to be happy, if you want to be fulfilled, if you want to enjoy your life, you got to put in the work. You got to actually enjoy what you do. Sure. And you know what I mean? A lot of times, people might look at those who have more monetarily, or more status, or higher up on the status. But if you're not happy, if you're not fulfilled, then it doesn't matter. Then it's like, what is it all for? Like, why do you have those things?
Yeah. I think like you get caught up on that stuff, and it's I think like getting to be creative is just it's just like a wild and wonderful like gift. And I feel like it's kind of like, as soon as you sort of like leave that mentality behind, like I feel like you end up just sabotaging your own career anyways. Like when you start caring more about your career than the thing that you make, then your career will just kill itself, because you're like, the thing you make's not going to end up being good, because you're like worrying about what it's going to get you, rather than just the actual work that like you're being trusted with.
Right. That's great. Why don't you want to do quick questions? And got a couple questions here that I ask on most of the episodes, and then we'll wrap this up. Let's see. Quick questions. What book has had the biggest impact on your life?
Lately, I read this book called The Warmth of Other Suns. It's like one of my favorite books I've ever read. It just completely opened my mind to so many things. It's chronicles a 70-year period of migration of Black people out of the South to escape Jim Crow laws. It's a research book. This woman spent like 10 years researching it, but it's and so it's kind of a history book, but she wrote it into 3 real life narratives of 3 people who kind of had pretty different circumstances. One person who moved here to LA, one who moved to Chicago, one who moved to New York. And it's just like a really beautiful, it reads like a Steinbeck novel. It's like you can't put it down. It's like beautiful, but just super like eye-opening. And I'm not hung up on it. I just like I read that book like maybe 2 years ago, and I like closed it, and I was like, that's like the best book I've ever read.
Wow.
So that's the one that's definitely like right now is like the like pinnacle book in my mind right now. It's maybe not like, there's maybe some other books from my past, but that one's like, yeah, the
It's
warm
really
Other Suns,
gotten you to think
Michelle,
a little bit differently.
Yeah.
What one skill have you leveraged in a way that you think others haven't?
That others haven't. Probably just my like my like, I think I'm like I'm like one of the only musicians I know that's just like extremely organized, and like I operate sometimes more like a producer than like a creative. That's just something that I know about myself, and so like I think that's been hugely helpful in just getting, you know, when I get hired for film, I'm kind of like a one-man show. Usually like they just give me money and they get music in their sound mix, and so there's like a lot of pieces in between. And so that's been a huge asset in just like being like good at like scheduling and like kind of like budgeting and thinking, I don't know, just managing like the like nuts and bolts. That stuff's like, I think been like a huge part of like my trajectory.
Right. You're essentially you're running your own business.
Yeah. And I enjoy it. Like I like when my wife and I travel, like I like planning, like researching, planning out, like budgeting the time, you know, like I like doing that stuff. So I think I've like, it's not that many musicians are like, a lot of my musician friends are like sort of the opposite. So I feel like I've sort of noticed that about myself, and just like rocking it out, and just being like trying to be super on top of things.
What's the simplest advice that's the most important to follow?
I think there are ways of finding out whether or not you're being true to yourself, and whether you're like truly listening to yourself. And I think that's like whatever you can do to make sure that you truly love what you're doing, and that you're not being swept away by other like culture, things that other people around you are trying to do. Like I think essentially, if you take a look at most of your creative heroes, probably all of them are just really true to themselves and making things that are like putting something unique out in the world, because they weren't trying to copy somebody. They're trying to like be true to like their own voice, and to like, and recognizing that it's probably worthwhile to somebody else for them to just say what's on their mind. So I think like trying to like really zero in to your own, listen to yourself and what you care about, both in like what you're excited about and also just what your standards are, and not compromising things that kind of make you feel a little gross, like listening to that, and just being, like I said before, you know, there's nothing worse than spending a bunch of time only to try and go up a ladder and then just not even get up the ladder. Like spend the time doing the things that you think are like worthwhile, and it's going to like pay off in one way or another for you.
Well said. And last question, what's the best way for people to connect with you online? Where can they find your stuff?
Not on social media, because I'm like a Luddite troll that doesn't use Instagram or Facebook. I have a Facebook for my music, but I don't personally use Facebook. I have a website, joelpwest.com. Pretty much all my music is there, and there's an email address that's posted on there if anybody wants to email me, they can. I'm all about email. I'm like very not into social media.
That is your social media.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I appreciate your support. I hope you got some value from Joel and myself on this one. I know that when I worked with Joel personally on our documentary Design Disruptors, he was just kind of he had this vast knowledge about creativity and how to work together. So I definitely learned a lot working from him. So do you like the podcast? Are you getting some value out of it? If so, there's a couple things that you can do to help. You can leave a rating or review on iTunes. Just search the Ground Up Show iTunes in Google and leave a nice little review or rating. That helps tremendously. The second thing you can do is to tell your friends about the show. So if there's a podcast that you really enjoyed and you know a creator that would get value from it, send it to them. The word of mouth stuff is how I grew my freelance business, and it's hopefully how I will grow this podcast. Lastly, you can contribute a question to the show. So send in a video or audio of your question to hello@mattdiavella.com. I'll get your voice on the show, your face on the show, and you and I together can help all of us get to the bottom of our creative struggles. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.